Hey everybody, welcome to video 2 in this going over Mongo series. So now we're going to be doing lesson 2. So here we're going to actually start working with schemas and running queries. Okay, so we're going to work on like creating data. So what I'm going to do is make a new file called lesson 2. Okay, lesson2.js. And again, all of this should be in my video repo. So if you look for in the video description, there should be a link to like my repo where I have like code from like all my more recent videos. And you just look for the MongooseJS folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the code from lesson 1. So now that needs to be all that different. Okay, and what we want to do is generally the way it's going to work with Mongoose is that you need to design your data models first, meaning you need to tell Mongoose what does your data look like what kind of data are you making. Okay, and that basically requires you to do two things. You need to create a schema. Okay, so we can create a schema like, let's talk about, I guess, dogs. So we can say const dog schema equals, and then what you do is you do new mongoose dot schema. Okay, and then here you pass an object, and this object is going to describe what does a dog look like. So you have to think of like, what is my data model? Meaning, what does one individual dog look like? Not a particular dog, just in general. Like dogs should have a name. Okay, which is going to be a string. Okay, dogs should have an age, which will be a number. Dogs will have. Now, what if I want to get a little bit more complicated? Maybe like I want to make sure that every dog has a tag, okay, like a serial number. So what I want, but I want to make sure that that serial number is unique. Okay, so what I can do is instead of just saying the type, what I can do is pass in an object and say, okay, the type has to be is number, but I want to specify other things like it has to be unique, and that's true. I can also specify like, is it required? We'll say yes, every dog should have to have a tag. Okay, so we'll say true on that. And there's a bunch of different, properties you can specify there. But the idea is that I could just specify the type, fine, or again I can specify multiple properties. There's a bunch of different things you can do there. And then optionally, I can pass in a second argument. And one of the things I can pass in the second argument is whether I want timestamps. And the beauty of that is that I don't have to create separate like created at or updated at fields. Usually you would have to like define those and say, okay, well, created at's always like the timestamp. When you create the thing, you have to create all this logic. Here you don't have to, it'll do it for us. So I can just say, hey, timestamps, let's make that true. So it'll automatically add timestamps to the data. And now we have our schema. So this new schema object, what it does, it defines what the data looks like. It's going to be used for validating data that we try to add to our database and data that we pull from our database. Okay, basically we're creating that blueprint that Mongoose can now use as data goes in and out. But what happens is that right now we have this database. So again, in my .env file, I specified, that the database is called mymongodb. But a database can have a lot of small bits of information. Each small bit of information is called a collection. And a collection, in this case, we want to have a collection of dogs. So multiple dogs that we'll save in a particular collection in our database. So we have to kind of tell Mongoose that we want that. So the way you do that is you create a model. And basically what we do is we say, so mongoose.model, and we actually need to save the result somewhere. So we're going to say const dog equals mongoose.model, because usually you call the model a singular uppercase name, just standard across all languages, across all databases. Okay, like the thing that you use as your interface, it's a singular idea. Okay, so mongoose.model, the first argument is going to be the name of the collection. Okay, so generally you just call it the name of the model, so dog. Now, one thing to know is that in databases, usually the collection or table name, if we're talking about a relational database, is always going to be plural. But Mongoose is going to do that for us. So when I say, hey, I want to create a model called dog, it's going to create a collection called dogs in the database. So keep that in mind when you look for it. And on Mongo, you're going to see something called dogs, not dog. So it says, okay, hey, when I save data in this new collection, when this model is used, what schema should I use to validate the data? So I'm going to say, hey, well, the schema I want you to use is the dog schema. Okay, and now this creates this dog model that I can use for adding and subtracting dog data. Okay, and now we can actually like run some queries. And now, right now, I'm not using like an Express or a Koa or a Fastify, some sort of server framework. Usually, in a kind of server framework, I can just connect and leave the connection open because theoretically, my server is just going to keep running. Okay, and then people will be sending requests to my server, and then usually like nothing happens right away. Usually, you establish the connection, and then your server just sits there and waits for people to send in requests, go to a website, whatever. Since I'm not building a server, this is just a one-off script. I want to make sure that it doesn't get to this code until after the connection is open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that whole event thing we did earlier. So like mongoose.connection.on and say, hey, I want to run this other function when the connection's open. And I will pass this as an async function, so we can use async await. And then I'm going to just do all my Mongoose code in here. The reason why is just because, again, I know this function will not run until the connection's open. So I don't want it to like try to do anything unless the connection's open. So then in here, what we can do is we can add a dog. So I will say we'll add a dog. Okay, so we'll say const, or not even, yeah, const dog, because what's going to happen is that the dog we create gets returned from the create function. So we use the model, which is dog, because again, we define dog right up here. So we're going to use dog, and dog's going to have a bunch of methods. So if I do like dog, see, there's all these different functions that are in there that we can use. What I want to use is the create method. This is going to allow me to like create a dog. I can actually pass it one individual dog or an array of dogs. And all a dog is an object that matches the schema. So basically, I just have to pass it an object that matches the schema. So we'll say name Ralph. The age of the dog is 6. And the serial number or the tag is, we'll say, is, what do we call it? Oh, it's a number. So it's 1. Okay. And there we go. So what's going to happen there is that now I want to use the word await here because anytime you do anything with a database, it's asynchronous. Why? Because that database is running on some other computer somewhere else. You have no idea when that thing's going to get back to you. It could be almost instantaneous. It could take a minute. So you don't know that you don't want that line of code holding up all your code. So generally database stuff, kind of like API calls, always returns a promise. Because basically the idea is like, we're not going to hold up your code, but here's the thing, so that way when the thing does arrive, you can write some code. So since I wrote an async function, and I know that dog.create, like all these model methods are going to return a promise, I can use the word await that pauses the function. So it says, okay, pause, stop right here, wait for that to finish. And then when it's finished, save the result in dog. Okay, so I add a dog and then we'll log the dog. Console.log dog. Okay, and then there is our script. It's simple as that. Okay, so essentially you have to define a schema that defines like that type of data, and then you create a model for that particular type of data. And again, you can create as many models as you want. So you can have like a schema. So I might have a schema for blogs, a schema for pictures, a schema for posts, users, and then each of them will get their own model. Okay. Basically, you have to think about what are the types of data that my application works with. Okay, and yeah, so I'll run this code. So this is going to be a node lesson2.js. And oh, looks like I got some sort of error, so let's see what it is. Mongo client must be connected to perform this operation. Which thing am I trying to do? Oh, I think I know why. Because here's what's happening. Since I have this mongoose.close here, and this is an async function, when this await happens, the function, this code runs before, and then before this ever gets a chance to run, because it's just the way the event loop works in JavaScript. So technically what I should be doing is moving this into here, like that. Okay, and that should fix the problem. And there we go, that worked. So let's take a look. See, I got connected to Mongo. I created the dog, and see, here's that dog object. So let's take a look at it. So you notice how the dog has this ID property. We never defined that in our schema. That's just something Mongo's going to do. It creates, every object gets its own unique like hash. That's an ID number. So that way, every object can be uniquely identified. So here's those timestamps that I mentioned. And then here's the properties we added. Okay, and we can continue like adding more dogs. Okay, but now if I go over to Mongo, I were to go to take a look inside the database and browse collections. Okay, I'll go to what we called it. My MongoDB is what we called it, our database. And see, there's our dogs collection. So remember I told you I was going to add that S, dogs. And I can click on it, and there's Ralph. Okay, so there you go. It's simple as that. Okay, and how you add data to the database. Okay, and I will see you in the next video. We'll go over some additional methods for like working with the data. I'll see you then.